Hi everyone and welcome to today's webcast. My name is Ben Hamer and I'm the Future of Work lead for PwC Australia, as well as being a board member of the Australian HR Institute based here in Sydney, and I'll be your moderator for the panel today. I'm joined by an esteemed panel of experts. We have Fede Santini, who is the HR Director at Lacoste, Lucy Adams, the CEO of Disruptive HR and the ex-HR Director for BBC, Bob Williams, the VP of Leadership Development at Teleperformance, Ivan Harding, the CEO of Applaud, the organisation for which has sponsored the research that we're talking to today. So a wide range of backgrounds, experiences and expertise that we're bringing to the discussion today to talk about the future of work, employee experience and HR technology. And it's been a pretty disruptive 12 plus months. The world of work has been massively shaken up, particularly off the back of the world's largest work from home experiment. And if you ask CEOs and HR leaders about going to a fully remote setup and operation, I assume that there would be quite a few of them that would have said that it couldn't be done. But what we actually found out was that it was more so that it wouldn't, because when our hand was forced, we saw significant operations shifting towards the home and virtual environment. And with that comes a massive disruption to the employee experience. So now, while it's tempting to go back to the way things were, this is really the opportunity for us to build back better, redefine the employee value proposition, and re-energize the employee experience. And so Applaud have sought to understand these impacts through their recent report, including what it means for HR technology. So I might just start off with Lucy. I'm keen to understand from you, how integral do you think that technology is to the employee experience?
I think, the fact that we're all sitting here on a virtual call, we've become so reliant on it. And we were before the pandemic, right? We were completely reliant on technology to do things effectively. And, I think when we look at the employee experience, I think it's like a kind of tripartite relationship between HR, who is thinking about some of the cultural aspects, the behavioural piece, the leadership stuff. We've got workplace thinking about, kind of the environments in which we're working. And then the core underpin to that is technology. So we can't talk about employee experience without talking about technology. It's absolutely integral.
And one of the interesting findings that came out from the report was that in times of austerity, we know that budgets can be constrained, and it seems that there could be a lack of investment in the short term in HR technology. I'm keen to just understand from the group at large, feel free to chip in whoever, is this going to get in the way of the gains that we want to and need to see when it comes to employee experience and the digital employee experience?
We work with HR teams all over the world, and consistently when we ask them the question, what gets in the way of you doing your best work, doing the kind of the sunny upland side of HR, the talent and the learning and all of the good stuff that we want to do, two things kind of consistently come up as the key barriers. One is leadership capability, but the other is outdated systems, outmoded technology, kind of clunky, time-sapping resources that and technology that HR teams have to use. So I think it absolutely gets in the way. And unfortunately, I think there's been both an underinvestment in HR system, but there's also been a tendency to go for, massive, big enterprise-wide systems that are supposed to do everything. And I think that's caused us some issues as well.
Well, and if I might perhaps add on this, absolutely. I think I've seen also in the companies I've worked in the past 10 years, the same issues coming up. But on top of that, I think that at times there is the willingness to invest. And I've seen the CEO investing. The problem is that then the approach on how to invest is a bit scattered, meaning that we tend to invest in a lot of, either we go with a big, massive ERP system, on the other side, we go with small systems that tend to address just one of the issues around, for example, employment experience, which is getting the right onboarding or getting the right engagement whilst they are already in the company. So therefore, you end up having lots of different systems that don't talk with each other, which means that then you have the HR department, the employee and the line managers spending a lot of time trying to make sure that all the data is correctly is correctly inserted in all these three systems, or more than three systems, really. And then again, you have the quality of the data. Who is going to ensure that data is going to be exactly the same in all the systems that we have put into place? And the systems are not talking with each other.
I was just going to throw over to you, because what I'm really keen to understand is, and what I'm hearing is that we're seeing an underinvestment historically, which is now driving significant demand, particularly with new ways of working. And we've heard the team so far talk about disparate systems. We're hearing this paradox of choice, and this is kind of the platform, if I understand correctly, for why Applaud exists. And so I'm really keen to understand how you're seeing all of this play out, particularly in the context of what Applaud does.
I think there's two breeds of customers we're seeing. There's the customers that have underinvested that Lucy's talking about, where you've got these old clunky systems. There's also been sort of pioneers in HR tech who went cloud really early. The customers that went Workday 10 years ago, and they've added in Cornerstone and learning, and now we've got wellbeing and surveys. And those customers that have gone cloud and would see themselves as quite kind of modern has just got this spaghetti of stuff that HR's gone and buy. The HR leaders kind of like buying new shiny things, and now you've got too many of them. So you've got the two customers that are thinking, oh my goodness, we've got this old stuff we really need to modernise, and we've got actually people at the other end of the spectrum that have got the very latest and greatest, and they're still getting those problems that we're talking about, because they've got too much stuff. There's too much complexity. People don't know where to go to do the things they need, and that comes back to there's a drive for simplicity, and that's a lot of what digital employee experience is. It's about making it simple for those end users of HR tech to do what they need to do to get on with their daily jobs, and do the things that they're paid to do, not work with HR too much. And I think that's where the survey came up with an interesting stat. I think, Ben, you said like 72% or something. I forget the figure, but it seemed like there might be a de-investment. Actually, I think there's more of a pivot. I think, and I've seen this with a number of customers that had kind of big rip and replace projects going on. They wanted to, chuck out their old stuff, but those sort of projects will come back. But I think those are on hold. I think what we're seeing is that budget is diverting into different tools like workplace tech, worker tech, to make that sort of tier zero experience for workers and managers a bit more frictionless.
Thanks, Ivan. And I might just throw over to Bob now, because given the work that Teleperformance does, you would have a pretty interesting take on how integral technology is within employee experience and the broader conversation that we're having.
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely huge. It really is. And then there's two sides of this that I really get quite passionate about. And in my history in banking, we were challenged by the fintechs because they come and have a blank sheet of paper and they build up their nice new technology, and it's legacy technology that really hurts us, because it's so hard to move away from, because the program that takes you onto something new is so absolutely huge and so scary. So the whole rip and replace is so significant, especially with something like Teleperformance, in 50 countries with so many employees. But it's something that has to be addressed, and it's when to take that that big decision. But when I was reading the research, I actually wanted to introduce something slightly different. That I think we're looking a lot at the wrong X. Instead of experience, it's expectation, and it was mentioned quite a lot in the research. Consumer grade technology, and we have a bunch of employees whose expectations are the same as Amazon. I click, something buys, it arrives, it doesn't arrive, I click, I get my refund, and it just works. And their expectation is that they work for a day, they get paid for a day, and everything works, and their badge works, and everything else, and that's it. They just expect stuff to work. So by the time you get to the experience of them interacting, it's below their expectations, and I think there's a fundamental thing here that we have to understand, that it's not acceptable anymore that maybe the payroll's out by a couple of quid. It's just not acceptable anymore, and the expectation's been completely dashed. And so, as I say, while we're talking about the experience and how they experience when they function with the technology, the underlying has to be 100% for this new generation that's coming through. Otherwise, their hopes are just dashed.
I think that it's something that we're seeing play out in Australia as well, because we have job vacancies in Australia over 200% what they were pre-COVID, playing out. So I absolutely agree with you. Ivan, I might throw over to you because I just want to explore a little bit more some of the research that came out. So at 90% of organisations believe that employees lose between 2 to 4 hours per week to HR tasks due to complex and manual HR processes. I assume that's absolutely something that you've seen play out throughout your career and in the work that you're doing.
I think, yes, there's lots of stats around time lost and efficiencies, and different people have different views on what that's worth to the business. I think certainly if you look at some organisations that put a lot of stress on managers in particular, there's some awful processes that managers have to go through to get things done, depending on what your role is and how sort of widespread the self-service component is. But certainly that's where we see most clients coming to us, is expressing all pain around management activity, and as what Bob said, the frustrations of having to kind of either ring up HR or fill out spreadsheets to send them off and get them back again, and all that sort of nonsense that sort of feels a bit last decade or even 2 decades back. I think that's been a real shift, probably from my experience. I remember doing projects all like 15 years ago, going to managers who have been asked to do this stuff, and actually the reaction back then was, well, this isn't my job. I shouldn't be interacting with tools. This is HR's job. And now it's completely pivoted. We're much more comfortable with technology. We're looking for this kind of zero touch thing in the same way as when I kind of booked my COVID vaccine. I didn't talk to anyone. I didn't spend 5 minutes on the line to the GP. I went onto the NHS site, chose a day, chose a slot. I mean, that zero touch experience is what a lot of people are looking for in their interaction with HR systems. Not having to ring up HR unless they want that help, and that's the difference. We want to be able to do the stuff we know that we want to do very quickly and easily, but have someone on hand to support us and guide us through when we're having a bit of trouble. And that's what the shift of this sort of tech is. Again, is to make that sort of experience a lot easier, taking leads from the consumer experience. What's your experience like when you go to buy something off a site? If you had a really clunky process, you wouldn't go there again. People are kind of taking that consumer and customer experience and reflecting it inwards.
If I could just build on that, though, because I think there's a couple of things that we need to focus on. I think there is, absolutely, we've got to reflect, as it says in the research, the expectation of a consumer grade experience with technology. And that's got to be right for all the transaction things that Ivan just outlined an example there of booking a COVID test and the equivalent of that in the workplace. Of course, it's got to be much more of a consumer grade experience. If we've got to train people to use a system, if it's not intuitive enough for people just to get, then we've got the wrong technology. But I also think that managers having an allergic reaction to being given self-service, or employees saying, but HR used to do that for me and now I'm having to do it myself. I don't think we should be celebrating that we are giving them consumer grade technology to do it with. I think we have to question whether there's real value to the manager in them doing it in the first place. So, one of the reactions that we get is that if they're being given systems that are to do with managing performance, and they're having to put objectives into a system and then put a grading and a rating in at the end of the year, which actually doesn't enhance performance, as opposed to HR questioning whether we want to take our broken processes, chuck them over the fence into self-service and say, well, but it's great because it's really easy to use. The fact is that managers are questioning and saying, I would do it before because it was, you would do it for me, and I would participate begrudgingly. But now, actually, I'm really questioning. Now I've got to do it all myself. I'm questioning whether this actually does help me manage my team. If I'm being asked to fill in a 9-box grid, the fact that you enable me to do it online doesn't actually doesn't help me if I don't think it's adding value to me in terms of managing the talent. So I think there's a couple of things. Yet absolutely consumer grade technology to meet increasing expectations of what good technology is about and a good experience is about. But also we've got to question what we're putting online. We can't just make the irrelevant more efficient. We've got to really question its relevancy.
When we sent everyone home because of COVID, there were a lot of managers who said, how can I be sure that they're going to work? How can I trust they're going to work? But the trust is the other way. Yeah. It's the employee saying, how can I trust that I'm going to be looked after? And then when they're spending 2 to 4 hours, doing an HR task or something else like that, and they're looking at this clunky process, they start really doubting the trust that they're truly being looked after. And especially when they're on, pretty tight time scales, and they're working hard, and they can see maybe their bonus is going because they're not on the calls, certainly in a teleperformance perspective. So it really snowballs a little bit that the trust starts to go if they don't feel that there's a real consumer grade experience there, that they're being looked after. So I think certainly for your example on the performance management, it's about how that employee sits there and says, right, I did all of this, and it also fed into the 9 box, and I'm getting a good report because I worked hard. I work hard all the time. Does my manager even understand that? So yeah, I think it's really, really valuable what you brought out there.
I think there's been one of the pivots I'm seeing is that it's been a tradition for HR to buy HR software. That's what Lucy is talking about, the 9 box and all that performance management system. I'm quite opinionated on all that stuff. But I think there is a change now where HR leaders are looking to buy technology that supports their workers, that's built for their workers first and foremost. As an example, Facebook Workplace is doing really well, and stuff like Slack is doing really well. And this isn't stuff that's bought for HR. They're not buying that because HR wants a social network. They're buying it because this is going to help the colleague experience. 10 years ago, I remember there was a bit of a rush to try to do sort of internal social networks around some of the big ERP vendors. They fell flat on their face. They just didn't take off. And I think it's mainly because one was the technology capability, but I think the other one was there wasn't really much in it for HR. Well, now there is, because there's such this focus on retaining top talent. The labour market is going to go through an inflection point this year as everything sort of self-corrects. And I think this is so much more of a priority to buy tech for workers, not so much for HR.
For me, one of the exciting things to come out of the pandemic is that, we've known that there have been, because you and I have worked with managers for years, that there has been a tendency for managers and HR to either kind of start not from a position of trust, or to design around, as you say, the minority or the lowest common denominator and apply it to everybody. And of course, what we've seen with the pandemic is that productivity didn't suffer by and large, that actually most people did care about their colleagues, and they'd usually turn up to work to want to do a decent job, and they then applied that and coped with unbelievable pressures in their home environments to carry on working and do the right thing by their colleagues and their customers and their organisations. So I think, as we return to whatever normal we go back to, the idea that we have either managers or HR who have a starting point that, we have to protect our organisation from these worst behaving employees and apply that to everybody, I think is something that really just holds no water anymore. And I'm hoping that HR kind of recognise that that the game has changed, and that we can have a new starting point, which is one of trust, and that people, by and large, the vast majority, want to do a decent job and want to do right by their colleagues and their customers. And that's a huge philosophical game changer for us.
Yeah, and Lucy, if I may add on that, absolutely. I think that, philosophical change of trust, the technology can help us, putting that into place. What I've seen so far, though, is as we are approaching, at least in the UK, thank God, the go to back to work normality, pre-COVID, let's go back to the office. What I've noticed that from the managers I'm talking to is that there is already that tendency of saying, oh, we've used the technology to keep us connected. That was great. However, there's that however popping through. However, I think, we should, perhaps go back to the office a little bit sooner. Or, however, why having Zoom interviews when we can have them face to face? So I think there is also that, whilst I hear HR being a lot on the same page, I'm finding more difficult to persuade the business leaders that actually technology has helped us greatly. So why cannot we just stick with it? Or find a common ground, a more hybrid approach. The trust element is something, that I've witnessed being quite funny, especially from business rather than HR. They're like, yep, we've done it. It was great. It was a nice exercise, but
Yeah.
let's go back. Let's go back to, I want to see my team. I want to see them in the office at least 3 times a week.
There's some validity to that, isn't there?
Yeah,
You know,
there
I
is.
think that absolutely. I've got a lot of sympathy with some leaders who are saying, I don't think we want to carry on all staying at home. I think, actually there does need to be this hybrid. But what makes me kind of gasp, and think, oh, really? Have we not moved on? Is when they apply that kind of old thinking. And I think, instead of it being, what do we want from our people? It's what do actually they need. And so, the classic thing that I hear from a lot of large organizations, we're going to be really progressive. We're going to absolutely continue to allow greater flexibility, and people can work from home 2 to 3 days a week. And it's like, that is such old thinking. Why would it be 2 to 3 days a week? That's because it suits the organization to be able to manage it and put it into a neat box, as opposed to, what are the moments that matter for our culture where it is vitally important that people actually get together? What about personal choice? We see organizations, Telefonica being a great example, where they've said, you choose where you work, when you work, and back to this trust point, we're not going to mandate it and prescribe it from the center with detailed policies. You sort it with your manager and your team as a grown-up. And so I think that actually, the more progressive outlook is, what's the kind of work that we do where it does matter? And that could be around innovation, co-creating. It could be those key cultural moments like your first day or your last day, or where you've got a real problem and something you want to talk through, quietly with somebody else. There are a whole raft of things that I think we can define much more effectively and progressively, either around personal choice or, the cultural moments that matter, rather than it being 2 to 3 days a week, which is just basically old-time flexi, just kind of repurposed post-pandemic.
So I'm keen to, I just want to go in a little bit further into, if we can, because Lucy, you touched on it, and the sort of broader disruption that we've had at the moment is this whole notion of hybrid working that we're seeing emerge, and the implications around employee experience, because we just put out some research at PwC where we found that 10% of people want to go back to 5 days a week in the office, 18% want to work fully remotely, and the rest, which is around 3/4, want to work those 2 to 3 days a week in the office and the rest at home. Not in an arbitrary way like you were talking about, Lucy, but with that broader flexibility and choice underpinning all of that. The question that it brings for me then is, how do you go about creating a consistent employee experience across physical and virtual spaces and teams? So, Bob, I might throw that question to you to start with around what are your thoughts around the consistent employee experience in a hybrid world of work?
What we're trying to do is actually push as much now into the remote path as possible, and maintain it there. I know I'm not really answering your question. When it gets up into like the leadership, we're certainly looking at what we have to do. That if one is remote, all is remote. Whether the person is remote and sat next to you, so you don't have 4 or 5 people around a table having a ton of banter before the meeting starts. Then Bob flashes up on Zoom and everyone just shuts up. It's okay. Everyone is in the same position, and no one feels like they're slightly left out. If it's all in person, it's all in person. And I think again, I'm going to stick with what Lucy were talking about, and all of us were talking about, is that trust element. That yes, if I'm remote, I am just as capable, and I'm just as reviewed as someone who is in the brick and mortar position as well.
For me, the key thing is going to be, what do the leaders do? Because we've all worked in organizations where, leaders have potentially or theoretically supported home working, flexible working, but they never work flexibly. They never work from home. They're always in the office. And so that if leaders return to work and they return to the office, and whilst they kind of say to their employees, yes, we're allowing you to do it, but of course the big important work is happening in the office, then that's where ultimately everybody will end up gravitating back to. So I think, the kind of Pepsi did this thing with leaders leave loudly. Now, this is pre-pandemic, but Pepsi did this thing where leaders would make a real big thing about, I'm just going to go now and pick up my kid from school. I'm going to go now because I'm actually working from home this afternoon, and made a real kind of, cultural point of saying, leaders are doing this as well, and I think that's going to be vital. I think if we see leaders being in the office, everyone will go, oh well, that's where you need to be to get on.
I wonder if we might see the flip of that. I see people with sort of families and more senior ones are the ones that seem to be more keen to do the homework and have the flexibility around family schedules, and actually some of the younger members of the workforce are the ones that really kind of miss that social interaction of being around their mates at work, having lunch, going out for Friday drinks or whatever.
Yeah.
And also learning from the seniors.
Yeah, that's really important. But I don't think we've really appreciated how much learning is done through observing.
Yeah.
But I think that's back to personal choice, isn't it, Ivan? Ultimately, if we're allowing choice and leaders are seen to be pursuing that as well, then I think it will become the norm, as opposed to something that employees are kind of indulged and allowed to work from home.
There was the famous Goldman Sachs thing, was it a month or so ago, where the CEO, I can't remember his job title, he put his fist on the table and said everyone was going to return to work. And I think he kind of came across a bit stern, but if you take that approach, you're going to lose talent, basically. Not many people of caliber will want to work in an environment that's inflexible and
I think you're right. And he called it an aberration, didn't he? Home working, and I think he was vilified for that. And I get why he would be criticised, but equally, I think there was something about the fact what he was trying to get to was that we are an apprenticeship culture, we are an innovative culture. Now, I'm not sure whether Goldman Sachs are that innovative. I've never worked there, so I can't comment. But I think what he was trying to say is that face-to-face matters as well. But unfortunately, he kind of appeared to be very dogmatic, didn't he, in the way that he put it across.
Do you think that CEOs and CFOs are taking this seriously in terms of budget and everything? Because I think that's an interesting. Another quote from the report was viewing experience as a sort of intangible benefit. You can imagine like going to the CFO and where's your business case? Well, we want to make culture better. Do we see a change in attitude? I think that wasn't there sort of 10 years ago. It seems to be coming to the fore. I'm seeing, corporate plans around colleague experience are entering the narrative when you talk to senior leaders now. Do we see the same?
And we're talking a bit about data, so I do want to pull in another stat that came from the report, which is that 2 of every 3 organisations report a lack of visibility into workforce data. Fadia, you're a HR director. Are you seeing this play out within the profession, and how do you think that a lack of visibility of data could be impacting employee experience of the discipline?
Well, yes, it's very much up front of the many conversations we keep having. As I was mentioning, and I'll give you a very practical example, and it might be the sector I've worked my life, which is retail, has been quite impacted, but I'm going to bring the conversation down to a very practical level. And really that's the reality of CEO, especially of, local branches of global brands, because at Lacoste, I look after the UK when I was working at Jimmy Choo's EMEA stores. But the reality is that in these big list retailers, and we might not be that sophisticated, we don't have HRIS systems that will allow us to look at workforce data and hence then have a conversation around with the CFO. You sit down and talk about number. You want to have a clear picture of your population, where they stand. That's the basic, Before I go and talk about engagement, I need to be able to go confidently to the HR, to the leadership team and say, this is your population, this is what needs to be done, We have, that's the seniority, this is the age of your population, this is the diversity of your population. We don't have it. And it's not something that, if I look at Lacoste, it was there also with LVMH, which is one of the biggest luxury group there is in the world. We still didn't have a proper HRIS system that will allow me to look into the data. And for me, I don't know whether it's just me, but as HR, I always start with data. Before I can go and talk about employee experience, I need to be able to be confident that I know what I'm talking about. And for me, it's the data. And talking about an HRIS system that doesn't allow you to run statistics, you go then into a payroll system that is not linked to the HRIS system. So again, you don't have visibility of all those financial data unless you reach out to the CFO and you ask the CFO to give you, as HR, the data around people. And the guy will never take you into consideration when you're going to pitch anything around numbers, because he's telling you, or she's telling you, you have no clue of your own data. How can you ask, to invest an X amount of money in that employee experience who you don't even know who you have in your employees? So for a lot of organizations, I think at a lower level, talking about medium enterprises, we are not there yet. We really need to go back to basics, which is data, which is, you're talking about hybrid model. Well, if you look at retail, we've had a hybrid model for years, because we have lots of employees starting remotely, or the employees in the store. The first day, they don't show up in the office. They go to a remote store in Livingstone or in Catalonia, and they don't have an email address of the company. They don't have a mobile phone for the company. So, and you say, well, they'll have their own personal laptop. No, they don't. Lots of these employees don't have a personal laptop. So how do you put that into place if the hardware is not even there? So for me, the basics sometimes are not there.
And I think, when we look at employee data, clearly, the fact that we don't have just the basics is unacceptable. And I think, increasingly many HR teams are now at least getting the basics. But I think when we think about that employee data, we kind of look to finance and think, well, we need to be able to have the information that finance require, which is basically an asset register. How many have we got? Where are they? What are they costing us? What's their shelf life? Whereas actually, I think if we're going to genuinely be providing a valued service to the business, we need to be thinking more about data and insight like marketing does, where we look at our employees like they look at our customers, because God, we've only still got, a basic asset register that in some cases, as Fadi says, doesn't even add up. And then we have an annual engagement survey that tells us once a year, basically what it tells every other company, that, we want better career development, better leadership, better communications, probably a pay rise. Whereas actually, if you think about what, every other consumer organization out there is doing, they want to know, how are you feeling? Do you like it? Would you recommend us? We've got to develop more of this kind of marketing mindset, and we've got to be doing, sampling and pulse surveys and hybrid of different types of research, because actually our marketing teams know more about our customers who are remote than we do about our employees. For the large part, we can't tell you the clusters of motivations for working at our organization, or which clusters would value which type of recognition framework, or which people learn in these particular ways. If we're going to genuinely be provided added value, then HR needs to be able to give those kind of insights as well as the basic data. Yeah. And I think we can do worse, can't we, than just ask our people, what are the things that get in the way of you doing your best work? If we start with that as a question, some of it will be tech, some of it will be leadership behaviors, some of it will just be, really frustrating, annoying things that we can perhaps move out of their way. But I think if we just ask them that question, back to your point about well-being, David, instead of focusing on Zoom yoga and, Fitbits, actually look at the things that we can help people just do their work, because actually it's so frustrating when you can't.
Yeah, and look, this has been a fascinating conversation, and unfortunately it looks like our time is coming to an end though, so I have to play that timekeeper role, but sort of pose the question to us around where to next. And so just to finish up, I'm keen to hear from each of you in just one sentence. What would you say is the call to action for organisational leaders when it comes to HR technology and employee experience? So I'll open the floor to whoever, and just to share final thoughts before we wrap up.
Well, I'll just refer you back to my previous comment about ask your people, what are the things that get in the way of them wowing customers or doing their best work?
I think I'd just build on that and just say, what are you competing with? Instagram, Facebook, and everything else, and then add on top of that, what can we do to help you? Because that's what the majority of them are interested in. That's the tablet time that we're competing with.
Yeah.
Yeah. And from my side, I would say make sure that you have in place all the relevant tools to make sure that that employee experience is indeed something that you can deliver. For me, it's a call to action on making it straight, having that basics in place, because otherwise you'll have lots of employees joining the company and leaving you after 3 months because they've not been connected with each other and with the organization.
Yes, I'll finish then. I would say, look at how you're treating your customers and how seriously you take customer experience, and start reflecting that inwardly, thinking about what your worker experience, because it's proven that if you look after your customer experience, that'll have positive impact on your business. And there's evidence coming now that the same techniques will have business improvements if you reflect that onto your workforce too. So think about consumer grade experiences and reflecting that inwardly.
Well, that brings us to a close, and I think a fascinating conversation, but really some really pertinent calls to action at the end of that right then. So Bob, Sadie, Lucy and Ivan, thank you so much for your time on the conversation today.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Ben.
Ben.
Welcome.
Thank
Thanks
you.
to you.